You just like to comment on that situation, what happened in New York with that Marine defending people on the subway?
Look, as a vet, vets look out for other vets. And what we can't have in our society is inmates running the asylum. And what you saw on the subway was you saw a guy that was very dangerous. He was putting people in harm's way. He was boasting that he may do harm. And I think to be able to step in as a good Samaritan and protect people, I think that that's something that was the right thing to do.
That's interesting when he said inmates running the asylum. Not just a dog whistle for Neely, who we know is black, but also just disgusting. But what would you expect from DeSantis? You would expect a lot of people out there to not necessarily fund Penny's defense, but that's not the case. After Penny was charged with manslaughter for choking Neely to death on a New York City subway on May 1st, well, individuals have run to support him, pouring millions of dollars into his defense. Yeah, the New York Times writer Jamel Bouie, he took a deeper dive into this issue about Republicans backing white male vigilantism. He said this: "It's been nearly 3 years since the riots and subsequent shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where gunman Kyle Rittenhouse, a 17-year-old from nearby Antioch, Illinois, killed 2 protesters in what a court determined was self-defense. And the reaction from prominent members of the GOP, well, we had Marjorie Taylor Greene, then a candidate, called him an innocent child, and Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky praised Rittenhouse for his incredible restraint. Rittenhouse would go on, and after his acquittal, to become a minor conservative celebrity, representing white men who take matters into their own hands, especially when the individual they're going against is in some way racially marginalized or uplifting issues that impact the racially marginalized." And we know that really since Rittenhouse's situation, vigilantes continue to pop up, and so does the support for them. This was an ominous development for what is revealed about the conservative mood. There seemed to be bloodlust, defined by an almost reflexive embrace of anyone who used lethal violence against a perceived antagonist. That bloodlust appears to be getting worse. We saw it last month when the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, announced that he would try to pardon Daniel Perry, 35-year-old, an Army sergeant who was convicted of murder in the shooting of Garrett Foster, 28, at a Black Lives Matter protest in July of 2020. And when this happened, who stepped in to push for Abbott to pardon him? Well, it was none other than Kyle Rittenhouse. "It was an unfair conviction," said Rittenhouse, who urged Abbott to step in and free Daniel Perry. The governor obliged, announcing on Twitter that he was working swiftly as Texas laws allow regarding the pardon of Sergeant Perry. Of course, in finding out that Perry is an identified white supremacist, white nationalist, things seem to shift. But the reality here that we continue to see is that the idea of who can take matters into their own hands seems to be exactly on the same wavelength of who is entitled to stand their ground or carry a weapon. And at the end of the day, I would say that just like law enforcement, these white male vigilantes are often seen as slave patrol, as slave catchers, to a large extent. So anyone who is racially marginalized, particularly if you're black, or if you are uplifting anything that concerns the racially marginalized, you are on the receiving end of that endorsed white male vigilantism. Rayyvana.
I mean, this should scare everybody, right? People should be afraid of the idea that it would be, legal. We would legalize vigilantism. I guess in that case, they wouldn't necessarily be defined as vigilantes anymore. But it should scare you that someone could kill you and then just claim that they acted in self-defense and that we wouldn't probe that at all in a court of law. I mean, I firmly believe that self-defense should be a defense if you're, charged with homicide, but you have to prove that. You have to prove that, with facts, with evidence, through the courts. You have to prove that you acted in self-defense. We shouldn't just assume that. I think that, and people should be afraid of that, but these people feel like they're, untouchable, right? That they shouldn't be able, or they shouldn't be forced to prove that they actually were acting in self-defense, which in many of the cases I don't believe they were, particularly in the case of the murder of Neely, in the case, in Texas where the man shot the Black Lives Matter protester, even in Kyle Rittenhouse's case. But they feel entitled, that they shouldn't have to show evidence, that because they are, white men, a lot of them white conservative men, that they should just be believed, especially if their victims were a black individual, a black man, a black person who they murdered. You should just assume that the black person was violent and that we should, allow that to be you should be able to say that you were justified in murdering someone because you were fearful for your life because that person was Black. It's ridiculous, and it creates, a very scary idea of what society could become, especially when it comes to all the people, or has been, or when it comes to all the people rallying behind him, supporting his legal defense, versus the smaller portion of money that people have given to support Neely's family. I mean, it's horrifying to look at, and I think people should be a little more scared than I think a lot of people are.
Well, if they're not scared, they haven't been paying attention. This is how our society has always functioned, the thought that white men are the ones who get to determine when there is a threat, and that it's completely okay and justified when they take matters into their own hands, law be damned. And also they get to, shape really how our society is policed in any way. And so this whole situation with Penny, it really screams to the injustices that are underlying our society, but are built within it. And his use of his hands in killing Neely is no different than these individuals out here using guns to take individuals' lives.